So we are in week 8. If you've been with us, we have been walking through a series together, and we have been looking at our faith, sort of in an apologetic sense, examining why we believe what we believe, looking for the clues, the preponderance of the evidence that leads us to the conclusion. Now, I said at the outset of this series that that God has left things, as it were, up to us to discover. And this is the way he's built it into the universe and into the world. There is no evidence, if you want to, in my heart, I feel like there is, but truly, every bit of evidence that you find for our faith has another side of the coin. And you have to examine that and decide which piece of that, does this evidence kind of start to weigh in favor of God's existence, for example? Does this weigh in favor of that Christ really is God? Does it weigh in favor of the fact that he rose from the dead? And as you begin to put evidence upon evidence, you realize that in fact all of it leans on the side, in my humble, of course, biased opinion, leans on the side of Christianity being the true worldview. There are only, from what I understand, only about 6 worldviews vying for people's attention today, Christianity being one of them. And when we examine it and handle it and consider it, it does come out, again in my biased opinion, it does come out on top as truth. And we've studied that and we've looked at that, and we'll not go back and explain it all. This morning I want to wrap this series up and do so by tackling a question that often comes up in regards to our faith. We are going to look at the problem of evil. If you have had any time or spent any time speaking with people about your faith, this almost certainly comes up somewhere along the way. The problem of evil is simply that. Now, why do we call this a problem? Why do we call this a problem? Well, it doesn't take long to figure out that to many people this becomes a problem. Because here's the question that often gets asked. If God, on the one hand, is good, holy, all-powerful, righteous, and loving, then why do we have evil in the world? Suddenly, we see the problem. And you know this problem as well as I do. You have had experience with these kind of things, and just for the sake of it, by our use of the word evil this morning, don't think of the most horrific thing you can think of. I am using this word in an all-exclusive sense, everything from stubbed toes and chipped teeth all the way to the most horrific thing you can think of, and of humanity or death of a child or whatever the case. The great spectrum of that we experience in this life is what we mean simply by the word evil for our purposes this morning. So we're left with this question, this problem. If God is good and loving and all-powerful and all-seeing and all-knowing, then why do things happen the way they do? In fact, it only makes sense that we would ask this question if you saw a child crossing the road and you saw that the child was going to be hit by a car, and you had the ability or the power within you to step out and reach out and somehow stop that child from getting hurt. And if you have the ability to do that, and unless you're a sociopath, I'm pretty certain, whether that child is a stranger to you or not, you would do something to help that child. Now, if you would stop evil from happening, why doesn't God? This is often a discussion, a point of discussion, clearly, when we begin to discuss our faith with other people, and it often becomes an excuse, if you will, for people to abandon God completely. Some years ago, my wife was on Main Street in a town we lived in a couple towns back, and some of the ladies had met each other with their strollers, and they started chatting and chit-chatting, and one of the toddlers in the strollers climbed out of the stroller, and the mothers weren't always paying attention, and this little, I think around 2 or 3-year-old or so, started to wander out, and all at once bolted out into the traffic between 2 parked cars. And as the child flashed by, this mother, who was not the mother of the child, saw this young one whiz past and realized what's going on, and looked up the street and saw a truck coming down the street, barreling down the street. And you could do the math. You knew this child's going to come out there and the truck's going to be right there, and this is going to happen. So this mother, without thinking, just out of reaction, reached for the child and missed, took another step and missed, and it was all in slow motion as she reached out and grabbed the child. And the only thing she could do, as the child's blonde hair was blowing, she latched into the child, the back of the child's head, and tangled her fingers into the child's hair and pulled, needless to say, on the one hand, to the child that was nothing but pure evil. Why did you pull my hair? And so forcefully, The mother had hair in her fingers and all the rest, and the child's crying because she just had her hair yanked, but not a clue that that pain actually rescued her from certain death. And then we ask, why is there evil in the world? Well, Jesus had the very same questions put to him. John chapter 11, this famous text that you know of the death of Lazarus. Mary and Martha had their brother pass away. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to him, went and met him, and Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." You see, that's the same thing we say today. If you were all powerful, if you were all present, if you were all knowing, this wouldn't have happened. Verse 35, Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? Couldn't this man who was powerful enough to do those other things, wait a minute, maybe he's really not all powerful." Jesus faced the same questions that we ask today. Why is there evil? Well, the conclusion that people reach because of this is rather obvious. They say it this way: since contradictory ideas cannot both be true, this is just the law of non-contradiction. A red shirt cannot be entirely blue, or a blue shirt cannot be entirely red. They both can't be true. You can't have two opposites. You can't be lying in bed and sitting on the beach in Fiji, unless, of course, your bed is on the beach in Fiji. But generally speaking, you know what I mean? Two opposites cannot be true. And since God is all-loving and all-powerful and all-knowing, and there is this thing of evil, and these are both contradictions, they can't both be true. So, therefore, you reach the conclusion, the obvious conclusion, God does not exist. This is how it was often used as an argument against God. Evil has been used as an argument to say, if there's evil, you can't have a good God. There's a contradiction. Or, on the other hand, the way that people react and try to make sense of evil is to say, yes, God does exist, but on the other hand, it's not that he's not there, it's that he can't help it. For example, if you read Rabbi Kushner's book from the 80s, the best-selling book after his son died, I believe, in a car accident, he wrote a book that explained all about God, that God couldn't help it. God's doing everything he can. He's a busy man. There's a lot of evil in the world. He can't cover all of it. Don't be so hard on him. He's doing what he can with what he's got, with what he knows. So the best way we can make the world better is for you to be good people and help God out, because God can't stop it. Or you bring God down and you say he just doesn't know everything that's going on. This is open theism. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. Hopefully you're not. Just ignore it completely. But it's a premise that's being taught even today in secular universities and the like, sometimes not so secular universities, that God is learning, that he doesn't know everything that's going to happen. He can't see the future entirely. He's figuring things out. This makes no sense when Jesus got on the cross and now he's like, okay, now what am I going to do with this? Didn't see that coming. I mean, the whole thing unravels very quickly, but this is what it's taught. This is the explanation. This is how we deal with evil. We bring God down. Some people just say he just started the whole universe as a spinning top. Deism, it's called. He created everything, and now he's, just off getting his nails done, and he's off to a new project. You can just let things run the way they are. He started everything going, and now he's just left it. He doesn't care anything about this, and you will bring him down. Now he's not loving. He's either not all-powerful, he's not all-knowing, or he's not all-loving. Somebody somehow tries to explain evil by either saying he doesn't exist or reshaping God's attributes. Both directions are wrong. So, how do we address the problem of evil? Let me try to do so by answering some questions this morning that we will simply pose and explain as we go along, and hopefully, to some measure, have an explanation. Now, you need to know at the outset of what I'm going to say this morning that this is not exhaustive. This subject is exhaustive. This subject is huge, and it'll bend your head, and it'll make you think beyond ways that you've ever thought before. That's why this is still a point of discussion. There are people who have dedicated their lives, their ministries, to dealing with this and handling this issue. It's huge, it's deep, it's thorny, it's confusing. So don't think for a second that I've got all little pot answers, some little cute thing that you can just write down and say to somebody. It might give you something somewhere, but it will be a framework that you can build a better explanation to understand the problem of evil. But understand this, it's a big issue. So let's begin with the question. What is evil? Might sound like a strange question, but if I was to ask you that, what is evil? You would probably most likely give me an example of evil. I'm not asking you for an example. I'm not saying, well, my grandmother had, a broken hip or whatever. I'm not asking you for an example. I'm saying what is evil? What is it? Well, here's what it's not. It's not a force. Why I say this is because we often talk like it is. We talk about all the evil in the world as if somehow we personify this thing, as if somehow it was out there floating around, that somehow if you open your door, evil might come into your house. Like you could get it on your shirt and maybe you have to wash it off, or somehow if you touch it, your hand is going to do something. It's not a force. It's, in fact, if you want to remember, say it this way, it is not a thing. It is no thing. Now, just that picture of that donut makes me hungry. I don't know if it does you, but have you ever eaten the whole of a donut? Silly question, and I'm not asking you about the Tim Horton Timbit thingers that they call donut holes. I don't mean that. Have you ever eaten the whole of a donut? That's a dumb question, isn't it? Because the moment you bite into the place where the hole is, it's not a hole anymore. It's kind of a letter C. And the hole fell, and where did the hole go? I don't know. Can never quite get that hole unless you stuck the whole thing in at once. The hole, in a sense, is not a thing. The hole only exists because the donut exists in the shape that it's in. But if you remove the donut, you don't have the hole. And that is the same way it is with evil. Evil, if you want to say it this way, is a deprivation. It is something that is there that is only there because of something else around it, like the hole of a donut. It is the result of goodness being removed. Evil is a hole in goodness. If goodness didn't exist, you would not have evil. It is in fact simply the absence of good. Well, this sounds all very philosophical. Let me help you to understand this maybe perhaps a little better. Let me give you some illustrations and just explain this to you in a few little ways. Maybe you'll get, maybe you won't. Let's see what we can do here. What is evil? We have factories that make vehicles, vans, trucks, cars. We don't have factories that make rust. Rust appears on a vehicle, as for this illustration, as a corruption. Rust appears as a corruption. You can remove that rust from the metal, but you can't take the metal and leave the rust. The only reason that the rust can exist is because the metal is there. And the protection on that metal, as whatever the case in regards to your car, has been removed. The paint or whatever you've done to rust-proof your car has been removed. And now the rust can get in and the rust can corrode. And it can't corrode if all the protection is there. If goodness exists fully, there will be no evil. But where goodness is missing, evil fills its place. Evil cannot exist where there is all goodness. Another way to look at it is a shadow. Shadows are not a thing. Shadows only exist where the sunlight is not. Shadows only exist where the sunlight is not. Evil does not exist on its own. It only exists where the shadows of goodness shine, and they are not. In the same way, this is why evil is. So, hope that makes some measure of sense to you. I tried to make it make sense to me. You won't know, for example, you won't be able to say what injustice is if you don't have the light of justice shining on injustice. You don't know what coveting is if you don't have the light of satisfaction shining on coveting. You won't be able to identify the evil if you don't have the good thing to shine light upon it. In the absence of the good, you have evil. So what is evil? It is simply a deprivation. It is something that is missing. Now, let me just ask you, or something that is there for when good is missing. Let me just ask you this question then, that we often get thrown at us. Does evil then disprove God? Is this a foolproof argument for the non-existence of God? Does evil, because evil is in the world, does that mean God can't exist? Well, if you were with us a few weeks ago, perhaps you'll recognize something of what I am about to say to you. Let me just ask you this. If you remember what took place, I'm sure you were around. Most of you look old enough to remember the events of September 11th in New York City. I think it was 2001. Let me ask you, is what took place on that day with the Twin Towers, was that an act of evil? Yes or no? How do you know that that was an act of evil? How do you know that? Because you can say they should not have done that to other people. Okay, why should they not have? You're surmising, you're presuming that there's an ought to and a should have. You're surmising that there's a standard that they didn't measure up to, that there's goodness that you can borrow and shine on this act and say this act didn't measure up to this standard of goodness. And therefore, because you didn't measure up to the standard of goodness, we know therefore this was evil. In fact, that standard of goodness that we use is God. Ironically enough, evil itself actually proves the existence of God. If you were to say, because there's evil, there is no God, you have also immediately removed the concept of evil. Because now all you have for September 11th is your ability to say your feelings about that. You could never say it was wrong because you now have no standard to measure it by and say they acted wrong. If there is no God, then suddenly all it becomes is your opinion against Osama bin Laden's opinion. He thought what he did was right, and you think what he did was wrong. Who's right and who's wrong if you don't have an objective standard opinion? If you don't have God's goodness to measure and act by, everybody's right or everybody's wrong. And now all you're reduced to is be able to say about this act on September 11th is to say, I don't like what happened. I disapprove of what they did. That doesn't make me feel nice. I don't appreciate that. Fine, thank you. You can talk about your feelings all day long and all you want, but you cannot say that that is objectively wrong because you have removed the possibility of God. I don't know if you can follow what I'm saying, but we talked about this, of course, 5 weeks ago, I think, when we discussed our moral argument. If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. It is simply a matter of examining the truth that because we use God to measure goodness, it can't disprove God. Does evil disprove God? Absolutely not. He is the standard by which we measure what evil is. So, ironically, in a twisted sense, when someone says to you with, oh, look at all this evil in the world, therefore God doesn't exist. If there's no God, then there's no evil. So the very fact that you're calling this evil, you have to actually call up God as a measurement to the standard by which you can say this is actually evil. So no, evil does not actually disprove God. So it leads us to another question then. Where does evil come from? Did God create evil? In fact, if God created all things, then God created evil. Therefore, God is responsible for evil. This is what people like to say, like to point out. God created everything, so then therefore God created evil. What's your response to that? Evil is not a thing. God created all things, but evil is not a thing. It's not a force. It's the absence of something. God did not create the absence of something. He did not create the thing called evil. He created the ability that evil could exist. Just in the same way, this might sound odd, God did not create your lawnmower, but he created the ability that all the bits and pieces and minds that behind it could make a lawnmower. In the same way, God did not create evil. Now, just for the sake of it, let's just understand this, that there are two sides to evil that we like to look at. There is a moral side and a natural side. And of course you know the moral side because you grew up with bullies in your classroom, bigger brothers, younger sisters that you picked on, whatever the case. You know what it is to have seen moral evil. One person doing something else to another person. Hate, crime, war, bigotry, the list is endless. This is one person choosing against another person. That's called moral evil. We have another thing called natural evil, and you know natural evil because you've had the sniffles, you've been to the doctor, you've had headaches, you've had stubbed toes, you've had all the rest, from viruses to volcanoes to earthquakes to storms. We have what we know is natural evil. In fact, we just watched this not too long ago in the news. We saw a great act of what we would call natural evil taking place in Fort McMurray as the fires came through and destroyed this city. This is our two sides to this evil. In fact, just if you don't mind me pointing out to you, this is exactly what Job faced. If you remember from the book of Job, Job chapter 1, if you were in the Bible reading club, you know we just read this a month or so ago, so you'd be familiar with this. Jumping into verse 14, and there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing, the donkeys were feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants to the edge of the sword. And I have alone escaped to tell you, is that natural evil or moral evil? The Sabaeans fell on them. That's moral evil. The bad guys came in. Immediately, while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven. That could be a lightning bolt that struck some tinder or dried grass or whatever the case, we're not sure. The fire of God from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. I alone have escaped. Is that natural evil or moral evil? So on the one hand, the Sabaeans, and now fire from heaven. And while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed three groups and made a raid on the camels and struck down the servants. Now the Chaldeans have come in. Is that natural evil or moral evil? It's moral evil. The bad guys have showed up again. And while he was still speaking, there came another and said, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness. Natural evil or moral evil? Natural evil. And they're both there. And Job experienced them both, 2 times of each category, just to heap on top the evil that he was to face and experience. Interestingly enough, if you know the backstory behind all of this, where did all of that come from? Who created that chaos? Who allowed this to happen? God. He stepped back and he gave the enemy the ability to go and do what he would choose to do. And so we have this very strange but difficult truth that on the one hand we have moral evil, we have natural evil, we're subject to both, we've seen them both, we know what they both look like, and the question is, who created them? Where did they come from? Well, moral evil is simply man's free will. You cannot remove evil and free will. Free will exists, therefore evil will exist. People who choose not to live up to the standard of goodness, to the standard of excellence, to the standard that God has set, people who choose not to do that will fall short of that glory and ultimately show themselves doing evil. That is simply the result of human free will. God did not make us robots. He could have chosen to put within us the ability to only love him, to only serve him, to only want to do good. But that would have defeated, for whatever reason in God's plan for the universe, would defeated the ultimate free will of the human heart that allows men to choose. And this is who we are. So what do you say about natural evil? I don't know what to say except this. God allows things to happen. Is he the source of those evil things? The world, we live in a fallen world. We live in a fallen world. He created the laws of physics, okay? He allowed the laws of physics to be a part of our natural universe. If I climb up a ladder, and I'm overreaching my reach on the ladder, and I'm stretching and stretching, and that ladder tips over and I break my neck, do I say, why does God allow bad things to happen? Dude, you were leaning on a ladder, and the laws of physics in this universe mean you can only lean so far, and that thing's going to go over. I remember hearing about a gentleman, and this is what I understand a true story. He was a Christian musician, and he was lamenting that God had allowed one of his fingers to be cut off, and he could no longer play guitar. and he was coming to grips with the fact that God would have brought his ministry to an end. Why does God allow evil things to happen? So somebody asked, how did this happen? What happened to you? What was the case? And he explained it. He was working in the yard. He was mowing the lawn. He saw something caught underneath the lawnmower, and he stuck his hand in to pull it out. And we blame God. What can I tell you? People say, why does God let things happen? Because the universe is set up in such a way that the sun coming through will give you a sunburn if you're out there. That tectonic plates move because we live in a fallen world. The mosquitoes hate you and they're going to bite you and try to eat you all in one gulp if you let them. Thankfully, they're small enough that they can't take it all. Have you ever got a mosquito on there and just let him stay there and pinch tight so he can't get his nose out? And just let him drink and drink and drink and drink and drink. Do you know, if you ever done this, you got to try this next time. Just let them go. You get the biggest mosquito bite you've ever had in your life, but it's fun. It will actually explode. He will reach a point, he's drinking and drinking and drinking, and poof. And you have the biggest mess on your arm and the greatest sense of satisfaction. Ha 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 ha. Why do we experience these things? Why? Because we live in a fallen world. Did God create them? He created the ability that bad things can happen. That's all we can say. So, here's the question. Did God create evil? Remember this. God can never fail to do everything good. To create something evil would be a failure to do good. Simple as that. God does not ever create evil, nor can he create evil. He is all goodness. And evil is simply a hole in goodness. When goodness is removed, evil appears. It lives where goodness is not. So, it begs the question. It begs the question, then why in the big hairy world does God allow evil to happen at all? Why? Well, if I had the answer to this, I wouldn't be preaching to you, let me tell you right now. I would be in a stadium somewhere flying around the world explaining the universe to everybody who would want to hear the answer, because this is the question. Why? Well, I think I have a pretty good answer in my own heart. I'm going to share with you what I think makes a lot of sense. Why does God allow it at all? If he's all-powerful, all good, all loving, all knowing, why is he not intervening? Why doesn't he stop these things? Why is this going on? Why do I have bad things happening to me? Where is God in the midst of it? Why? Well, you have to ask this question. If God were to put an end to all the evil in the world, he might just start with you. You have to ask the question, how much evil would you think that God should allow? Is there a requirement? Is there some criteria? Should he say, oh, you can have all this only up to this amount of evil? You can have 8% evil within you? What? If God's going to allow some evil, shouldn't he also just have to allow all evil? If God allows no evil, then nobody exists and nothing exists. And that is not what God has chosen to do. And if he allows us to exist and the universe to run, he has to allow evil in some measure. It has to be allowed. And also, if I can just point out very politely, I absolutely love this verse. It is easily, hands down, one of my favorite verses in Scripture. Psalm 115:3. If you don't know this verse, just learn it. It is very simple, and think about this very carefully. Our God, the personal, our God, not our made-up idea of God, our God is not among us. Now, I don't mean this in some, that he's not ever present and all of that stuff. I don't mean that way. But he's not us. He's not one of us. He's in the heavens. He's separate from us. He's far and away above us. His ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. Our God is in the heavens. And guess what he does? This is the privilege, the honor of being God. When you're God, surprisingly enough, you get to do whatever you want all the time because you're God. Our God is in the heavens. He does all that he pleases. And if he would like to do something, who are you to say, you shouldn't do that? I don't like that. That's wrong. I don't appreciate that. That's bad. Surprise! You're not God. Our God is in the heavens. He does whatever he wants. There's something so refreshing to my spirit to just know that. That explains so much of my life. That explains so much of what has gone on. I mean, this is replete through Scripture. This is not an isolated verse. Daniel 4:35, for example. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing. He does according to his will among the hosts of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, what have you done? He's God. And if he wants to allow evil, let him allow evil. I mean, who am I to say, you can't do that? You can't run the universe like that. You would have to automatically answer the question, which you cannot answer. How do you know that no good can actually come from evil? How do you know for certain that somehow, some way, although there's wickedness and evil in the world and all that's going on and all the chaos, how do you know that it's out of control? Do you think God can't handle people's evil? Do you not remember what he said to Joseph, or what Joseph said to his brothers? You meant this for evil, but did it bother God that they meant evil? God, in his sovereignty, in his mathematical mind, can look ahead and know all the wickedness and the choices that people will make, and God stands back and watches their evil choices and somehow weaves his own plan. He is so in control that he even uses evil to accomplish his good purposes. That's why we have the cross. He allowed the wickedness of man, the hatred that they heaped on God himself, to accomplish his good purposes. That's what God does. God is working out whatever his plan is in this universe to one day ultimately quarantine evil and make it completely segregated to one place that the Bible calls hell, so that it will no longer exist throughout our universe. He is allowing the universe to run its course so that one day evil will no longer bother us, no longer molest us, no longer be a part of this universe. It is one day coming to that fruition, and for now, God is working out his plan even in the midst of evil. How do you know that God can't accomplish good? You know this in your own life. You know that you learn patience through trials. You know that you have learned to be compassionate through suffering. You know that you have learned perseverance through obstacles. You know that in your own life. So, who is to say that that is not what God can accomplish, that ultimately he allows evil for his own purposes, for his own ends, for his own ways? He is not responsible for it. He is not guilty because of it, but he allows it to take place, and that the people that choose and do what he wants, they ultimately become puppets in the hand of the great master who accomplishes his great purposes and his ultimate will. Because our God is in the heavens, and he can do whatever he pleases, and we don't get to tell him otherwise. Can the potter say to the clay, say to the potter, why did you make me? Why don't I have a handle? Do you get any say in this? We are just at the subject to God. This is what happened in Job 38. You know the book of Job well, I'm sure, and you know at the end of it, God rebukes Job. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. Stand on your 2 feet, in other words. I will question you, and you make it known to me. And here come the questions. And if you know the text, I've only just begun with the first verse. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. The whole book of Job, they're complaining and trying to sort out why has all this evil happened? What is going on? And Job wants to make his case. And what's the answer that God gives? I'm God. Who are you? Where were you when I did this? Where were you when I decided how the ostrich would behave? Where were you when I decided how big to make Behemoth? Where were you when I did this? What did I ask you? So who are you to ask me about the evil that I allow to happen in the world? I am God. I don't want to make him sound like he's some maniacal tyrant, because that's not our God. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we all bow the knee to the sovereign God who allows evil because God chooses to allow evil. And this is the same dilemma that we all face, the struggle that we all know, and the moment that we all wonder what's going on. The disciples are in the boat. The storm is wailing against the boat. Water is coming into the boat. They're starting to panic and scream, and they're trying to trim the sails and bail and everything else, and they know they're going to die. And they look over, and what's Jesus doing? Oh, how is it that it always seems to be that God is passive when you feel like he should be active? Why is it that when you're in the midst of some big storm and some tragedy is rolling around you, you automatically have this sense that God has abandoned you? That somehow you're on your own in these moments. That somehow he's just off taking a nap. Don't you love this story? Jesus talks to the weather. Hello? Man, I wish I had this ability in high school. I would have had a snow day all the way, even days there weren't snow. Just stand up, open the window, snowstorm please. I mean, he talks to the weather. Who does this? Only the person in charge of the weather. And do you know what he's just showed them? I was sleeping because I was in charge the entire time. That you have nothing to fear. I'm in the boat with you. Oh, sure there's a storm, and sure you may drown, and sure there's tragedy, but I'm never not in charge. That is the God we serve. Why is there evil in the world? Wow, what a huge question. What is evil? It is the absence of goodness. It is a hole in goodness. It is a shadow when the light of goodness, a shadow where the light of goodness shines, and goodness is not. It is not a force, it is not a thing, it is simply the absence, as I've said. Does evil disprove God? In fact, no, it doesn't. You can't even know what evil is without God. God is the source of goodness by which we can measure that thing is evil. And if you remove God, you haven't got any evil to measure at all. God is the source of all goodness. Without God, you have no evil. In fact, the whole argument falls on its head. Evil actually proves the existence of God. So did God create evil? He created the environment whereby evil could exist. He created a humanity that had the ability to choose to do foolish things to themselves, to others, to their environment, to the world around them. He created the universe so that it follows laws of nature and laws of physics, and it's doing what it does. And these tip and balance and scale. And why did God create them? He created the environment where they could exist, where evil could exist. But he's not responsible for evil. So why does he allow it? Because he's God. I don't know what else to tell you. That may sound like a trite and simple and shallow and hollow answer to you, but I know that serves justice to my own heart, because God is God, and he can allow what he wants, and he's working out his purposes, and that is what God does. That is what happens when you're God. You allow things to be for your own ends, for your own purposes, because your will is being accomplished in spite of everything that's going on. And this is simply the God that we cling to, the God that we worship, the God that we serve, in spite of the evil around us. And this is our faith. Can we pray? Father, we thank you for the opportunity just to discuss some of these things that go to our minds and often don't get tackled, and sometimes questions that we don't have answers to. We just pray that you would encourage our hearts this morning in these things. Father, we thank you for who you are. In Jesus' name, amen.